the FBI said, we have found 110,000 of your gold. It was about 200,000. He was out. And if you drive down right now, you can get it.
That's cool. It's pretty cool.
Anyway, that's a different kind of.
For sure. All right, folks, I think we're going to get started here. Welcome to Digital Privacy Training. I'm Jeff Jokish at Obscure IQ, a digital privacy researcher. If you don't know who I am, I do a lot of content posting on LinkedIn. I was an independent data privacy researcher until just a couple years ago when I hooked up with Colby Scully, and he created Obscure IQ, and I joined him here. We help people recover their privacy, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But let's sort of dig into the training first. I'm going to let you guys chime in anytime you want if you've got questions, because I want to make this as interactive as possible. Colby's here with us. He's a little bit sick, so I don't know how much he's going to interact.
Hey, everybody.
Hi, Colby. Jump in anytime you want, buddy.
I'll jump in a little nasally. Just bear with me. But yeah, thank you all sincerely for coming. Jeff, it's a really great idea. I'm so glad you came up with doing something like this. And yeah, it'll be a really informative session. We can't wait to get through it with you guys.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to sort of cover today. A few different little topics. I want to talk a little bit about the Matthew Leibelsberger investigation that we did. We've also want to talk about why privacy is important. We want to talk about commercial surveillance, or refer it as the other brother, like Big Brother, but not Big Brother. We'll talk a little bit about location data and pattern of life and inferences from that. And then we'll talk about data deletion going sort of off the grid. And finally, sort of the biggest piece is sort of how to plug the data leaks that we have that feeds that monster. All right. So I want to give you a little bit of a context. The Matthew Leibelsberger case, I assume you all know that back around New Year's, a couple of different incidents happened, one down in New Orleans and one in Las Vegas. And at the Trump Tower in Las Vegas, a guy blew himself up in a Tesla Cybertruck. And that guy was Matthew Leibelsberger. Before he did this, he had the manifesto that he wrote up, and he sent it to a friend of his, and that ended up on a podcast. And it was a little bit strange because what he said was crazy, and he made a bunch of weird accusations. People were sort of unsure whether that was actually him. We got involved because we were trying to help an Army analyst, a former Army analyst, determine whether or not it was actually him that sent that email. And a lot of people were up in arms about whether that was actually the case. So Colby did an investigation and used open source intelligence to determine that it actually was him. I could sort of point you to that investigation that we did. The video of that got several million views. It's compelling. And the reason I think you might want to take a look at it is because we look at the data from data brokers and piece together the information that's available on anybody, not just him, right, or me, or right, but you can see here, right, that we've got this email address. Facebook, right, just by hitting Facebook and finding out what information they have publicly available, like trying to do a password reset, we can actually find out that that's connected to a phone number that has a couple of digits available. So we can see that phone hint ends in 84, right? And using pieces of information like this, right, and the fact that he was also had a Tesla registered to him, right, we can start to piece together the story of Matthew Leibelsberger and essentially attribute that phone number back to him with certainty. And we can do that with other people and other pieces of data, and essentially build stories about them. And that's how data brokers do that to you, right? And how bad actors can grab pieces of information about you and use it against you. So with that in mind, I wanted to give you a little bit of a background, because I think most people don't really understand how we sort of got from where we were to where we are today with data privacy. This is a really busy slide, so I don't expect you to look at it and understand it at all. So I want you to focus first on this red line in the middle. We started back in about 1980. We had a PC And then the web came around, and then there was eBay and Google and Facebook and the iPhone and big data and Internet of Things. And now we've got AI, right? The technological surge that we've had over the past, 40 years, right? Around 2000, with all that stuff happening, we started having data breaches and government spying and ransomware and all these sort of bad things happening because all this data is out there about us, right? If you look also sort of at the top, though, right, we've had even all the way back to the 1970s a movement to try to have more privacy laws passed, right? There was the Fair Credit Reporting Act and the Privacy Act, which protects the information in our government, and FERPA, which protects educational information in our public schools. And then there was the second wave that covered healthcare information and financial information and children's information and corruption, right? All these things that were happening, but they didn't have really a whole lot of teeth, and none of them were really comprehensive, at least inside the United States. There were some that were more outside the United States that were a little bit more comprehensive. But now, then we started sort of getting more comprehensive things and more laws with teeth that have sort of come even just in the past couple of years. So that's where we are now. That's the evolution of where privacy has started from and gotten to, right? And this is not just a US thing, and it's not just a European thing. Generally, you only hear about the US and the GDPR, but Latin America has strong privacy laws. Asia has strong privacy laws. China actually has a really strong privacy law outside of the fact that they actually spy on their own people. They don't really let anybody else spy on them. And frankly, Russia is sort of the same way. Why do we even care about privacy? I think we all probably care for different reasons. We don't want spam. We don't want people spying on us. We actually think that privacy is important for democracy. And there's a few reasons to think about it that way. It's really important for freedom of expression and thought. It protects us from surveillance and fear of retaliation. Allows us to express our opinions and beliefs. It protects us from government overreach, right? It limits the power of the government and institutions. It also, lets us have independent choice and freedom from manipulation. I think it's really important that we think about that when we give away our privacy freely. There's not always a lot of pushback against privacy. People sort of say privacy is dead and we shouldn't fight to keep our privacy. And I think that's really a terrible way to think about it. There's always a way to get your privacy back. I believe that privacy is inevitable, right? We can't continue down this surveillance capitalism path. Eventually, there's going to have to be a reckoning. So, what about other things? Why would we want privacy for social discourse? I don't know if you've noticed, but all of the social platforms used to let you log in anonymously, and now they all want you to log in with your actual name and ID. LinkedIn wants you to give them your birth certificate and passport to register with Clear, right, so that they know exactly who you are. And it's getting sort of crazy out there. Well, in some cases, you might want to be exactly who you are, but it shouldn't necessarily be a requirement that you be who you are to be able to make a social post, right? I think there's a lot of reason to be able to have anonymity in doing a social post, because you shouldn't have to tell everyone who you are in order to have a voice, right? And that's what this is about. Some people need private, personal safety and security, right? Doxing is a real problem with real world threats and harassment. So if I tell you who I am and it's very easy for you to find out where I live, that's a problem. Right? We see that every day. A lot of our clients come to us to try to escape from being doxed or the consequences of being doxed, right? There's also an ability to encourage honest and open dialogue if you don't have to actually have your full information or your real name out there. There's a study back in 2020 that found that if you have anonymous online forums, there's a greater diversity of opinions rather than everybody actually having to be who they are, which sounds sort of counterintuitive, but The thought is that if you have a pseudonym, it's not necessarily a throwaway pseudonym. Obviously, if you can just, make up a new email address and log in, say whatever the hell you want, and then leave, that's probably not good, right? But if you're creating a pseudonym that you want to hold on to, a long-term pseudonym, you're actually tied to that. You don't want to say something stupid and get banned, right? But you don't necessarily have to know that that pseudonym is me, right? In order to be able to have that discourse. So, and then there's also the prevention of social and professional repercussions. So let's say I want to say something on LinkedIn, right? Well, that's tied to my job. If I start talking about Trump positively or negatively, I'm probably going to impact my employment prospects today. And that's a problem. It's a really interesting situation that we're in right now. So maybe we shouldn't have, our identity tied to everything we do on social platforms. How about voting? Voting is another interesting thing. I think it's important to sort of highlight these issues. In the US, we actually have lots of transparency in voting. You can actually go to websites and look up people and their voting behavior, not necessarily who they voted for, but the fact that they voted. And that's not necessarily terrible, but the fact that our personal information is out there for voting is also problematic for people that are trying to avoid domestic abusers or bad actors who are trying to find them. So why do we need privacy for voting? Essentially, freedom from coercion and intimidation, encouragement of independent thought, and especially protection from repercussions. Now, let's move on to commercial surveillance, because that's really the big problem that we have here. We always thought that government surveillance was going to be the problem. If you look back in literature, and just social discourse, we always thought that the government was going to be spying on us, and that was going to be the big problem. That was George Orwell in his book, 1984, An Animal Farm, that the government was going to be the big problem. They were going to have all of our information, and they were going to use it to coerce us and spy on us and surveil us. And we saw some of that in East Germany during World War II. Well, I mean, there have been some abuses, certainly in governments, even in America. But what we never really saw coming was commercial surveillance in the way it's arrived. And it's really a direct result of how we decided to monetize the web and the way ad tech works, right? And so the real problem has been that data brokers are not regulated at all. And we could talk a little bit about why that's the case. But first is sort of a comparison. Hairstylist versus data broker, right? Hairstylists in all 50 states are licensed and they're regulated. They require training, licensing, sanitation, and inspections for hairstylists. Data brokers, and there actually are a few regulations, right? But they're pretty much unlicensed. There are very few limits that they have. There are some limitations in particular areas around credit bureaus and children's data and medical data and a few things that California has done around them, and maybe a couple other states now, but it's very narrow, right? And here's sort of the reason why. Congress and the courts have made it very hard for data brokers to pay for their bad behavior, first of all, right? Congress has really given us zero comprehensive federal privacy legislation. And very importantly, right, they passed a few years back a reseller's exemption in the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And this was really key. So there was an amendment to the Fair Credit Reporting Act that added some pretty interesting privacy protections for you and I, and gave us things like the ability to get our credit score, right, free once a year. And that was actually pretty cool. And it added a couple other cool things too. But they slipped in when nobody was looking was the ability for resellers of this kinds of data to completely bypass all the FACRA regulations. So essentially what it meant was that anybody that wasn't outright selling the financial portion of your personal information did not have to abide by anything that FACRA says, right? And that's why all these people search engines and background check companies can sell a complete consumer profile on you, as long as it doesn't include your banking information, and they don't have to do anything that FACRA says. So the Fair Credit Reporting Act is very sort of comprehensive, has lots of rules that they would need to follow, including notifying you of adverse decisions based upon that credit profile, that consumer profile. They don't have to do any of that, nor does the people that buy the report, right? It's all bypassed because of that loophole that was passed, right? There are some limits, like I said, with HIPAA, right? And Gramm-Leach Bliley and COPA. And there's also another big hole that you probably don't know about in the Driver's Privacy Protection Act. That law was specifically passed to keep Department of Motor Vehicles from selling your driver's license data. But there was a small loophole in that law that let the Department of Motor Vehicles sell it for a couple of small purposes. And the courts essentially then opened that loophole a little bit wider. And now data brokers get all of your data. So it's essentially a free for all. Anything that you give to your DMV, it goes to a data broker. Every state sells it. So, and that's actually the basis for most of the personal data that gets sold is either your voter records or your driver's license information and some other court records and real estate records. Take all of those public records. That's what most of the data brokers sort of start with, and then they enhance the stuff from there. Now, there's lots of other tech stuff that's harvesting lots of our behavioral information, our location information, and there's just a myriad of other things that they can harvest, right? But from that government record set, then they start to add on all of these things that they can tell from our phone and our devices, our cars, and different things like that to add to those consumer profiles. And there's lots of stuff. We could talk a little bit about real-time bidding process. It's becoming more and more problematic, and Google is doubling down on that with its recent lean in to move away from cookies, but move into digital fingerprinting. And what the real-time bidding process is every time you go to a website, you get ads served to you, generally multiple different ad spots on every single web page, right? Well, every ad slot is served by one company. One company gets to serve that ad. But for every ad that gets served to you, about 20 companies get to bid on that ad. And every company that gets to bid on the ad gets your personal information. So for every ad you see, 20 companies gets to see your personal information. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they get your name. What they get is some kind of an identifier along with your data. But because we're talking about a world of big data, it's very easy for these companies to de-anonymize that information. And that's what they're doing. There's been lots of lawsuits. The FTC caught a bunch of companies doing exactly this, and there's been a bunch of exposés. You can look it up. It's very easy to do, where these companies are essentially pretending to actually come in and bid for ad space. And all they're doing is harvesting your data by pretending to bid on these ads. They do this day in and day out, collect all that information, de-anonymize it, put it into a consumer profile. It's pretty scary. It's like a data breach that happens ongoing every single day. And Google knows about it. They're enabling it.
Question.
Yep.
Do you see Google as a friend or foe in these scenarios? Because I don't see them as a yeah, I see them enabling the issues, but also they're on the side of wanting to look good, but also, I look at IAP meetings and they'll have their general counsel at the meeting. And so it's like, how can the chickens get together and talk about the foxes when the foxes are in the hen house already?
Well, I mean, I always thought that they were trying to be good, but I don't think they're really trying anymore. I think they've sort of given up on that, and there's no more smoke screen. They don't really care. Um, I mean, it's pretty obvious that that what's going on here now. It's becoming pretty transparent that they don't really care. I mean, especially with the move to digital fingerprinting. A year ago, they pretty much said that the digital fingerprinting was evil, and now they're saying, yeah, we're going to do that, and we're going to allow all the advertisers to do that too. There are some limitations. They're essentially saying that advertisers can't do digital fingerprinting on a broad scale, so they can't digital fingerprint you globally. They can only digital fingerprint you on a domain by domain basis. But still, I don't know if you guys understand what a digital fingerprint is, right? A digital fingerprint is like a cookie, except that you can't see it. It's generally on the server. So they're essentially scanning your device, right? And looking at different system things, right? Like how big your browser is, how your browser is configured. If your browser has certain extensions on it, it can even look at your CPU and different things, all kinds of different hardware things, right? Like sort of like the biometrics of your computer, right? And because there are so many of those different things, it uniquely identifies your computer and says, okay, I understand what Jeff looks like now, right? And then every time Jeff comes back to my website, right, I know who he is. I don't have to drop a cookie on his computer anymore because I can recognize him.
Which to me is much more concerning because when it's tied to your hardware, it's obviously much more difficult than clearing your cookies on your browser
Yeah.
or clicking an incognito window.
Mhm.
And and thankfully there are some ways to spoof it. It's not very widespread yet, though. It's not particularly user friendly. Um, and it's always not always 100% effective. I mean, they go down, they take it from, kind of like what Jeff was saying. It's like, oh, how much space is on your hard drive, what type of processor you have. And then it goes down to screen resolution. It goes down to they're able to determine some like something with the audio system on your actual computer. It's really, really invasive.
What
And
font, what
there are
fonts you have installed, right?
Oh yeah, fonts you have installed, and because there's so many of them, and Jeff brought this up, because there's so many of them, there can be, 50 something different pieces of information. It is extremely, extremely unlikely for it to be literally anybody else in the world.
Yeah.
And this is much more concerning, in my opinion, than cookies ever were.
Well, and they can ask for your consent, but I mean, you never really even know whether they've whether they're actually complying with that. How would you know if they deleted the cookie or not? How can a regulator know that whether they're complying or not? I mean, there's no evidence, right? I mean, so now you just have to like, it's much less transparent now too. So it's much more detailed and it's much less transparent. So it's sort of scary. Somebody just had a comment there. I missed it though. Was it
Yeah,
Jesse?
this is interesting, Jesse.
What was the
So
comment?
I'm going to skip down to the bottom part here because I find this really interesting. Google even provides documentation on how to dehash MAIDs. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. If you guys don't know, an MAID is your mobile advertising ID. Apple has a MAID, Google has an MAID. Apple started sort of blocking. They don't really use it as much. It's very easy to block it. They still have it, but most people don't have it enabled. But most people, I think last I looked, like 93% of Google Android users have an MAID, and you actually have it on the desktop as well. And so that's the sort of pseudo anonymous identifier they use for the real-time bidding system. And it's not very anonymous. It's very easy to figure out who somebody is. And in fact, some data brokers actually sell lookup lists of those. So not only can you figure out who somebody is, but you can just go to a different data broker and buy a list that they've already figured it out. That's pretty scary, right? So, and here's a different point. The screen we're on here now, right, is so this is not even talking about real-time bidding. This is just the SDKs that people can install on your cell phone, right? Every time you download an app, lots of times it'll have an SDK embedded in it. Um, and that SDK is oftentimes not even built by the app maker, right? It could be an SDK to help a game manufacturer monetize, or you know, SDKs serve all kinds of different purposes. It's a software development kit is what an SDK stands for. This SDK that I have in the background here, right? This one says, it can tell whether your headphones are connected, whether you're in a vehicle, whether you're near a bus stop, whether there's sparse crowding around you, whether your device is pointing up, whether it's locked, whether the user is moving, whether cell phone data is off, whether Wi-Fi is connected, whether you're near a school, whether you're running, whether you're in an office, whether you're sleeping, whether you're having coffee. I mean, these are just like some crazy ones, right? It can tell like virtually anything, whether based upon the sensors in the phone and inferences that it can make, right? So the stuff is really just crazy. The different things that they can understand about you with these SDKs. And this includes like a lot of location information. What we're finding out now is that some companies are actually embedding these things in here, and they're able to actually extract data even when the company that embedded the SDK in the app doesn't know about it. So that's pretty scary. And they're even getting around Google and Apple. So like a company can embed an SDK in an app, and it gets through Google and Apple's clearances, and it's actually sending data back to this third party, and nobody even knows about it. Pretty bad. I'm going to keep going. I think you guys all know about the National Public Data Breach. This was a company that essentially was doing background checks. They're a relatively small company in Florida, but even this relatively small company had 2.9 billion individuals that they were a database of, right? And they didn't secure it, and it was stolen. And so now 3 billion of us, essentially, well, I guess it was virtually all Americans, right, had their social security numbers stolen, right? So we're all outed for that. And then a whole bunch of other people around the world lost their data as well, because this one company didn't have their data secured. And there are hundreds of these companies that are just like NPD, selling data. And there are actually thousands of them, right? In the codex that we talked about at the top, these data brokers that Colby and I track, we have 8,600 organizations that are either specifically data brokers or other types of consumer surveillors in the ad tech or other ecosystems that are related. You can bet that a lot of them are not taking care of your data. They're not securing it particularly well. And they're just waiting for a data breach like this. There has been a lot of action that the FTC has taken. We'll see whether that continues, if they're going to get hacked down pretty significantly with the new administration. It doesn't look like that's going to continue, but we'll see. But they have been taking a lot of action against data brokers, including location data brokers. Location data, as we're going to talk in a minute, is pretty crazy. The types of information they can infer about you. That was one case. Subaru was another case. Actually, that wasn't an FTC case. This was just a security flaw that somebody found. This was another case, though. GM just agreed to a 5-year ban on selling location data because they were actually selling it directly to insurance companies. Was
What
pretty
can
bad.
go wrong?
Yeah, right. Well, we're actually finding that our cars collect as much information as our phones about us, and manufacturers have been selling that data. Um, and it's sort of hard for me to get really mad at the car manufacturers. I am mad about it, right? Because they're selling our data, and virtually nobody knew this, right? Because they had these 80-page long contracts, and the data stuff was just sort of hidden in there. But I don't think people realize that virtually every type of company now, right, is selling your data as an additional revenue stream on top of what their normal business does, right? You go
Hmm.
to the grocery store, right, and they want to sell you, they want you to sign up for a loyalty card. And that loyalty card is essentially just a way to track your purchases so they can sell that data. Yeah, you might get, a little bit of money back, or discounts on certain things, right? But you're losing out on that proposition, right? Because they're making a lot more money selling your data, right? Than you're getting on discounts, right? And I can tell you that they're probably selling that data to insurance companies, and they know every time you buy ice cream and bacon, and they're probably jacking up your insurance rates much higher than any, discounts you're getting on those products. So you have to realize, the trade-offs that you're making here, right? You're not really winning whenever you get discounts and coupons for your data because that data is getting used against you by insurance companies and other organizations, whether they're using it to understand your behavior so they can charge you more, right? Or whether they're using it to understand your behavior so that they can, understand a risk and charge you more for the risk that you're incurring. It's not a game that you're going to win, right? The more data they understand about you, the more you're going to have to pay. So let's take a look at location data brokers. This is a study I did, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago. These are location data brokers or companies that have large amounts of location just in North America. This was, I think, about 150 of them. And you can see just by the types of companies over on the side, ad agencies, ad delivery and optimization platforms, ad platforms, DSPs and DMPs, ad tech, attribution and analytics companies, data providers and aggregators, identity resolution, some people search companies, and then some that we couldn't even figure out what the hell they did normally. So lots of different types of companies, right? But the problem is, right? Well, here's how they track you for location, right? They buy data from the apps, right? Those SDKs, right? They grab information from the real-time bidding system, which we already talked about, right? They harvest your location from social media, and they buy your information from the car manufacturers and automated license plate readers. So there's also stuff here like how they can actually infer your data from social media, right? And this is some other pattern of life stuff that they can infer. But I want to actually get to the how you can actually protect yourself here. So I'm going to sort of skip through a little bit of this stuff. This is sort of how like your data sort of moves through the system, right? So, you know, you give your data to one data broker because you took a survey, but it ends up going to, you give it to advisors and they give it to Experian and they give it to ALC and they give it to EdTech and then eventually goes to a marketer. But you thought you gave it to one company, it ended up going to 5 companies. That's really the problem, right? You think you give your data to one company, but it really goes to a lot. Right? Here's how we sort of think about all kinds of different brokers. There's so many different types. Um, it's not just a couple of things, it's a whole ecosystem. We could talk about this more, but I want to sort of get to how to protect yourself, right, from this $300 billion industry. So one of the things we do for our clients, right, is there's sort of consumer level services that will help you delete your data, and they're valuable. They will help you delete parts of your footprint. One of the things that we found, because we started doing that, is that in order to really delete your footprint fully, you really have to do an audit first. You have to understand where all of it is. And that's sort of how we differentiate ourselves for higher profile and higher net worth clients. If you don't understand where all the public record stuff is and the dark web data, and you don't understand all the aspects of that information, all the selectors, you can't actually go delete it all. So what we do for our clients is do a very invasive audit first, and then we do a footprint wipe. But let's look at plugging those leaks, right? So first of all, right, what you want to do is get your comms in order, right? And you do that by selecting a phone with privacy in mind. And I'm going to have each of you, anybody that registered, I'm going to send out a more detailed guide than the one that you probably signed up when you looked at. We have a whole set. I wonder if I've actually got that here. See if I can find it real quick. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stay with this. But I have all the steps below this. So I can blow out all these steps and it'll have paragraphs and paragraphs of information under each of these. Plus, I think I can probably click this and it will open this up. Yeah. So I can actually send you all of these little pieces of content that we've created. So this is actually an analysis of which phone will give you the most anonymity, where we've analyzed all sort of the top privacy phones, and will help you pick which one that you might prefer. Right? We've done the same thing with messaging apps. So you can find which one you think might work. Lots of people sort of go with Signal. There are actually a couple of new ones out, Session and Matrix, which actually have some higher privacy potential, though they have lower adoption. So it's sort of a mixed bag there. We think these are sort of important things because these are methods where people can actually grab your information. If you don't have good methods to communicate that are secure and private, you've got a problem, right? So let's take a look at the second point, right? The second point is actually securing your data, and particularly your financial data. The single most important thing you can do to protect yourself from identity thieves is to freeze your credit. And a lot of people don't do that because I don't know, I'm not sure why, right? Really, your credit should be frozen by default. It's not because credit bureaus want you to buy things and they want credit, right? And that's their whole sort of business model, right? They're credit bureaus. But it should be much harder for people to steal your credit. And if you go to a credit bureau, you can essentially freeze it. And what that really means is that you can't, nobody can get your credit until you unfreeze it, right? So essentially it's sort of like putting a lock on it. People think it's going to be hard to unlock it, but it's not. Once you actually sort of like set it up this way, you can actually call and you can unfreeze your credit in like 5 minutes. It's very simple. So I would encourage you to do that, right? Second thing, and I don't hear anybody else actually sort of recommending this to people, but we think you should shield your financial information doing two different things, right? One is when you access your bank accounts and other financial accounts, use a separate secure device, right? What we recommend is going out and buying a cheap laptop or a cheap Chromebook or even a cheap iPad and use that as the only way you access those accounts. The reason is this, right? If you go to your normal computer where you also cruise the web and do all your email and shit like that, that's the device that you're likely to get malware on, right? Because you're cruising the web and you're opening up email and you may be clicking on the wrong thing, right? Where you can get a virus or malware or Trojan on. you don't want to do your financial stuff on that device, right? Now, it's true that you could do that and infect your entire network and everything could be bad, but chances are that's not the case, right? That device is what's going to get infected. If you do all of your financial shit on another device over here, right, you're much, much safer. Only use that device to do your financial stuff, and you're going to be a lot cleaner, right? It's much less likely that anybody can get to those accounts and that this device is going to get dirty if you're only using that to go to your bank and do transactions, right? The second thing you can do is use virtual credit cards. A lot of credit cards have the ability to create a virtual card from it if you're using certain banks. If you don't have a credit card capability with your current credit card, you can actually go to privacy.com and you can create a virtual credit card from your bank account. And essentially it just gives you a credit card number, and you can set it to have any like limit on the amount of transactions, the amount of value you want. So you can say this card can only do $200 and only can do a certain number of transactions. And after that, it just stops, right? So if somebody were to grab that number and try to use it for bad things, can't do it. It's done. The third thing here is just for all of your data, in addition to your financial data, use strong passwords and use two-factor authentication, right? If you're not using two-factor authentication, you're going to get breached. Right now, it's very easy for accounts to get hacked. They're trying all the time to hack into, especially your social media accounts. If you're not seeing password resets come through, on your accounts, you're unusual, right? I see them come through all the time. People are trying to hack into my accounts, and they're doing that on other things as well. One of the things you saw when we did the Matthew Leibelsberger thing at the top, right? A lot of the data that OSINT investigators can get is actually by sending a password reset to Facebook or these other accounts, right? When you do that, it sends data about the account back to you, which is sort of crazy, but that happens. So one other word sort of about passwords, right? It doesn't really matter how complicated your password is. If you're using all these crazy letters and numbers, people used to think that was the big thing. The important thing is length, right? We recommend you use passphrases just because they're easier to remember, even if you're using a password manager. We recommend using passphrases, but length is the important thing, right? You can see this one here is like 12 digits long. It'd take 34,000 years for a single computer to crack it. The problem is that it's not single computers that these bad guys are using. They're using a string of computers, right? Which means it could happen a lot faster, and they can use other techniques and stuff. But you can see if you double the length of that, right? Now it's 42 quintillion years. That's much harder to pass, right? To crack it. But if you just add a few more digits, right? And then a few other things, 8, 9, I don't even know how you say nonillion years, right? But you see how just a little bit longer and a little bit more complicated gets you. It's crazy, right? Length is so much more important, and the longer you go, the harder it is to crack, right? So we won't talk about other problems with cracking passwords and quantum computers, but it's a problem for another day. But long passwords will even make that harder. So recommend you start putting in 20-digit passwords and use the password manager to manage that. Okay, so how do you protect your browsing habits? first thing is we talked about Google and real-time bidding, right? And how terrible that is. How do you get out of that ecosystem? One thing you do is you stop using Chrome, right? Don't use a Chrome browser. So if you're using Chrome, and you can probably see that I'm using Chrome right here, stop doing that. This is going to be the last week I'm using Chrome because they just switched over to digital fingerprinting. I just can't do it anymore, right? So stop using Chrome. Pick Firefox, pick Molvad is actually a pretty good browser. Frankly, anything other than Chrome is good. But what's the other one we recommend, Colby?
Uh,
Oh,
I'm trying to
Brave.
think. Yeah, Brave. I like Molvad a lot too. I might be switching over to that. What Molvad does that I think is fairly interesting is they make everyone's browser fingerprint nearly exactly the same. So the more people that join, uh, start to adopt that browser, the more everybody's just going to look the same, and it makes it's probably one of the best security methods that actually could be used to actually protect someone's privacy.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So the other thing that you can do is use a VPN. Now, a lot of people, even cybersecurity people, sort of poo-poo VPNs. And there is some skepticism about this, right? So the problem with the VPN is that the VPN company can see everything that you do, right? So you're essentially moving the risk from one place to another, right? So let's say if you use NordVPN, which is what I do, right? Then NordVPN knows every place that I go. The value, though, is that now my telecom provider doesn't know everywhere I go. So I find that valuable because I don't want AT&T, my internet service provider, to know everywhere I go because I know they're going to sell that information. And I'm pretty sure that NordVPN isn't. You see the value? Right? So knowing that one company is going to sell it and knowing another company is probably not going to sell it is valuable to me. The second thing is that the VPN, right, will essentially lose most of the location information that is attached to it. So even if it's not, sorry, I'm like losing my train of thought here. It's also valuable for disrupting a lot of the location information that's attached to those transactions. So it actually hurts that the ability for people to grab the location information along with those transactions. So if Google, for instance, is trying to grab the location information off of that for a real-time bidding transaction, if I was to use that VPN and still use Chrome, it's much harder for them to attribute my location information when they do that through the real-time bidding process. So you still don't want to necessarily do that, but if, even if I'm not using Chrome, right? If I go to a website that has a Google ad in it, it could still go through the real-time bidding process. But if I have a VPN, it's likely to not give my location data to Google and distribute it through that system. Does that make sense? So the VPN has a lot of value. Sorry if that was a little unclear. The third thing you can do is use a secure DNS. Now, this is actually a little bit more technical, but a secure DNS service, there's a couple of different providers, and we can sort of give you several that you can choose from. But it's sort of like a VPN, but it's a VPN for your DNS lookup. And every time you do a DNS lookup, just like you navigate on the web, that stuff can be tracked. So a secure DNS is another sort of layer of protection that you can use. And there are some free ones and there's some cheap commercial versions that they'll also help with that anonymity. And then there's two other quick things here. This one's easy to do. Manage your permissions is it's actually hard to do if you try to do it yourself, but we recommend an app called Block Party. I think it's like 30, 40 bucks a year. They just raised their prices. I think it was a little bit cheaper. It was like 25 bucks a year. But Block Party app is a browser extension that you can put on virtually any browser that you choose. And what it does is they follow all the social media platforms, all the big ones, like 9 of them. And those guys are always changing their privacy settings, right? So trying to make sure that you have your LinkedIn and your Facebook and your TikTok all set up right so that you're not leaking any data right to those social media platforms, assuming you're using them, is hard because they change it all the time. Block Party manages all that for you. All you have to do is log into the platform with that browser extension turned on, and it'll tell you if you're leaking data that your pictures are visible, your location's visible. You need to turn off the new Gemini shit that, Google enabled or whatever, right? It manages all that for you and tells you what you need to turn on or off to manage your privacy. It's really valuable. Another thing you can do is we've got some guides on how to do sock puppets if you want to create an anonymous account on social media. And then finally, as we're running out of time here, if you want to become really hard to track, right? The way data brokers connect information together, the way they track you across devices, right, and put all your information together, you really need to understand this, right? Is if you're using the same phone number for a long period of time, the same email address for a long period of time, the same physical address for a long period of time, all your information aggregates around those selectors, right? If you log in to a new account, you create a new account with some new SaaS service, right? And you use the same old email address, the same username, right? The same phone number, right? All your information then connects together and they say, aha, that's Mike, right? We know where he lives. We know everything about him. Now he's got registered for this account. We'll just add that to his profile. But, right, if you use some new unique username, a new email address, a different phone number, right, when you register for these accounts, they can't track you. So there are ways that you can do this, and we'll sort of help you if you're interested to create new email addresses, usernames, even phone numbers, so that when you log into new accounts, people can't connect all that data quite so easily.
And
You can even do it with property.
yeah,
Well,
Jeff and I
sorry.
have Jeff and I have a friend who was kind of having an issue with their email account was constantly many times a day getting somebody was attempting to hack into it. And we kind of scratched our heads for a little bit trying to get a full understanding of as to why it happened. During the investigation into it, I found something interesting about myself. I found out that my personal email address, there were tons of attempts to try to access it. And I have two-factor authentication on it, and thankfully none have been successful. However, we really did some research and came to the conclusion I've had that email address since I've been, I don't know, 10 years old. And it's been out there everywhere. So, I've had to migrate so much of my life from that email address over to a new one. And thankfully now there's new technology out that can help you just create like an alias email on the fly. So you're much harder to track. If I'm looking to track somebody down and they use alias emails, it's a massive problem for me. That's going to be very difficult. I want to call out a comment here. So it looks like Tomas Z, can somebody provide an example of a sock puppet?
Yeah, so a sock puppet is just like a pseudonym, a fake, like a fake social media profile that you would create, right? So I could create a LinkedIn account, right, and call myself Jeff Sampson, right, and and then start posting under that account. Now, oftentimes people think of a sock puppet account as an evil account, or an account that's doing something, I don't know, negative, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, right? It's just an account that you use that's not necessarily connected to you, at least in the parlance I'm using it as. So the idea is that you could create an account that's not connected to your identity. That's all we mean by a sock puppet account. That could be a Twitter account, a Facebook account, a LinkedIn account, or whatever.
Excuse me.
It can be pretty valuable to have an account that's not connected to your real identity, even if you just want to post for whatever reason, right?
So question on that. So aren't we dealing with some kind of preponderance of evidence or something, or some percentage of things that become the tipping point for, like, for example, if I create a sock puppet LinkedIn account and I've got 200 people on my real account that have my name and picture, and then I create this sock puppet account and I put 175 connections on them, and I call them and tell them, hey, this is really me and whatever, and they all join my sock puppet account. At what point does a third party have the ability to infer or conclude this has got to be that guy, because too many of these same people are on that other account? Like, how does that play out?
Well, that's a good point, right? And that's how you can out yourself, right? If you have people that are connected to both accounts, right? We actually just had a client with a similar problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who had a bunch of people following her sock puppet account, who were connected to her, and we're like, that's going to be a problem. Better stop doing that.
And normally, whenever these accounts are created, right? Normally, like the first few people who follow you, okay, like on Twitter, you're gonna get like a few bots, and then like the third, fourth person is gonna be like your mom, your spouse, your kids if they're old enough, stuff like that. So the most for from an investigative standpoint, the most valuable followers that I want to look for are the people who would follow you first. That's by far because they're by far the ones that are most likely to actually know who you are.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's exactly who we look for to try to figure out who actually is behind an account.
Interesting.
Yeah, we do that a lot actually. We do investigations of people trying to, uh, I mean, most of our work is trying to recover people's privacy, but oftentimes in recovering privacy, people get attacked by anonymous accounts, and so we have to actually go in and try to figure out who the attacker is. So we do that kind of work as well, and so that's why Colby is. Okay, we're a little bit over time here. Any other questions before we close shop? Um, I think I've got email addresses for all of your registrations. If not, you can ping me and I will send you documentation for all the stuff here, and a videotape link as well.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
What do you do? What does your company do? And what do clients engage you for?
So what we do is what we call privacy recovery. So we give them an audit. And you can buy different types of services, but essentially we do digital footprint audits, which helps people understand what their risk profile looks like, what their threat surface looks like, where all their data is, and if anybody might be coming at them. And then we help them delete that information to whatever extent they want and is possible. And then we can also do active threat monitoring. So if somebody's coming after you, we can help you mitigate that risk and understand that risk. Um, and then we can actually do active investigations of particular threats. I think those are probably the four things we primarily do. And there's probably a few things in addition to that as well.
Yeah, that's a really, yeah, that, and Jeff, that's spot on. And what we really try to emphasize kind of a personal we really try to put a personal touch on every, client package that we have, because we realize every single person does have a fairly different and unique privacy challenge that they come across. So what we try to do is we try to work with our clients. Okay, hey, listen, here is what is out there about you online. And based on the results of that audit, here's some things that we're going to recommend you do, and we can help you work through it and get you to a better privacy spot. And sometimes that, is just some simple tweaks. Other times it's going to take us sitting with you over a call or two, to help you implement some changes into your digital life. And we're happy to help you and coach you through all of that, in addition to the services that we offer.
Yeah. We do also offer these kinds of services to enterprises. Mostly that's been smaller organizations up to this point, but we're talking to some larger enterprises now as well. And the reason they're interested in the services is sort of twofold. I mean, you know that a lot of C-suites are now getting targeted. After like the United Healthcare CEO getting shot, a lot of them are pretty antsy, and so they're wanting to get a lot of their digital footprints offline. But in a larger sense, organizations are at risk primarily to be breached, and most of those breaches happen via their employees, um, who are already inside, the perimeter defenses, right? So it's not people that are actually hacking the company. It's people that are hacking their employees, right? The business email compromise through, phishing attempts, through social engineering. And the way they do that is by getting these employees information, their digital footprint information online, and figuring out how to compromise them, right?
It is much easier,
Yeah,
much easier to do that than to try to breach a perimeter.
right,
People can do that all day long. You can build automated scripts to do it. It's nearly miraculous it doesn't happen more, but it's not hard to do.
right. And it's going to get worse with all this AI, and the scripts the bad guys are going to be able to use and all the data that's available. So what companies are realizing now is that their people are a threat surface. And what we can do is essentially help them mitigate that threat surface by deleting the digital footprints of their employees.
And if anybody's, interested or wants to talk about this, by all means, let us know. Um, we're happy to schedule a call and discuss any of this with anybody. Um, this is, this presentation was, kind of, this is really part of our knowledge set. It's a subset of it, really. There's a lot more that we can, help other individuals and organizations with. So if you guys have any questions, want to discuss any problems that you might have, by all means, reach out to us. We're more than happy to talk to you.
Yep.
Now,
Right.
will you be sending out any information on how to engage your services and maybe what things cost or?
Yeah, sure. We can send that out to you.
Yeah, we're more than happy to, Craig.
We've got lots of collateral, and any particular questions, we're happy to answer.
Okay. Because as a financial advisor, I'm trying to think what of this information is valuable to my clients that have all their money custodied at Charles Schwab. For
Yep.
What is this something? I mean, sorry for my ignorance, but the only things I know about are LifeLock and stuff like that.
Sure.
You're
Yeah.
you're you're beyond that, I would imagine. Are
Yeah.
they a joke, or there's some value to them?
Well, it's not that like they have no value, but um, if you have high net worth clients or even moderate level, worth clients, it's probably not enough.
So I say this about kind of a lot of companies, kind of like LifeLock, and LifeLock falls into this, right? LifeLock does a really good job of giving you a massive checklist of all the things that LifeLock apparently does do for you. And almost sometimes I think they focus a little bit more on kind of the frontward like kind of the facade, right, of the protection that you have. So if you get identity theft occurs to you, read some of the terms of service in the fine print. It's not the best coverage in the world. We're not in that business, by the way. We're not like in the insurance business or anything like that. So we don't really have a stake in the game. But yeah, we really think that going through a more holistic program like what we have, that actually will solve your problem. It's not like a purchase to make you feel good. Like this takes a massive amount of work on our end, and it does take some work on the actual individual's end too. But it will holistically make you a much safer person online and in your real life.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
All right. Thanks everyone for attending. We appreciate it. And have a good Friday tomorrow, and hopefully a good weekend too.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Kobe.
Take care.
Thank you.